Sunlight found the cave before warmth did. A narrow blade of pale gold slipped through the entrance and crawled across the stone until it struck Ahrate's folded wing. The light shimmered over her muted silver scales, turning their edges almost white without giving off the slightest hint of heat. I woke beneath that wing with my face pressed against my arm and one leg numb from the cold. Most of me had remained protected through the night. Ahrate's body held warmth like a furnace banked beneath stone, and the leathery underside of her wing had trapped enough of it to keep me alive and reasonably comfortable. Anything outside that shelter had not fared so well. The lower edge of my cloak was stiff with frost. My boots, which had extended beyond her wing, were coated in a thin crust of ice. When I moved my feet, the leather cracked loudly enough to echo through the cavern. I pushed myself upright and lifted the edge of Ahrate's wing. She answered with a deep, irritated huff. Warm air washed over me, carrying the faint smell of smoke, leather, and dragon breath. "Good morning to you as well." One of her golden eyes opened halfway. The look it gave me suggested that morning was neither good nor welcome. She shifted her weight, dragged her wing back over her head, and attempted to bury herself more deeply against the cavern wall. I crawled free before she could trap me beneath it again. The remains of the fire lay in the center of our camp, reduced to gray ash and 3 blackened pieces of wood. I crouched beside it and searched for any surviving ember, but the night had killed everything. The storm still moved beyond the cave entrance, though it had weakened. Snow no longer screamed sideways across the opening. It drifted in slow, twisting sheets, illuminated by the rising sun beyond the clouds. Our supplies remained strapped to Ahrate's saddle. The saddle had been made by the drow, dark elves whose skill with leather and metal was nearly as impressive as their talent for making everyone around them uncomfortable. Its frame was compact and shaped specifically to fit between Ahrate's shoulders without restricting her wings. Dark leather panels overlapped one another across the seat, reinforced by silver buckles and narrow bands of blackened steel. It was not beautiful in the way human craftsmen understood beauty. It was severe, precise, and nearly impossible to damage. I loosened one of the side straps and opened the narrow storage roll beneath the saddle. Inside were several bundles of dry sticks I had gathered before the storm, wrapped carefully in oiled cloth. I carried them to the cold fire pit and arranged them over a nest of bark and dried grass. Then I looked toward Ahrate. She had returned to sleep, or was pretending to. Ahrate. Her ear ridge twitched. I pointed at the firewood. Then I pointed toward her mouth. She opened both eyes, stared at the pile, and rolled them so dramatically that no human expression could have equaled it. With another huff, she turned her head away and tucked her snout beneath her wing. "You are a dragon." No response. "You breathe frost, mist, and enough arcane cold to freeze a pond solid." Her tail moved once across the floor. "And yet you cannot be troubled to warm a few sticks." The tail stopped. I waited. She began snoring. Useless creature. One golden eye appeared beneath the edge of her wing, briefly narrowing in my direction. I took out my flint. The first strike produced nothing. The second sent sparks across the bark. By the fifth, a thin thread of smoke curled upward. I leaned close, breathed carefully over it, and coaxed a small flame into life. Soon the sticks began to crackle. Ahrate lifted her head just far enough to feel the returning warmth, then lowered it again as though she had contributed something. I decided not to argue. There are battles worth fighting, and then there are arguments with dragons before breakfast. I fastened my cloak around my shoulders and approached the cave entrance. The fabric had thawed near the fire, but its lower edge remained damp and heavy. As soon as I stepped beyond Ahrate's warmth, the cold cut through every layer beneath it. I pulled my hood over my head and tightened the cloak around my throat. Outside, the mountain had been remade. Snow covered the ridge in smooth, untouched drifts. Jagged rocks protruded through the white like the bones of some ancient buried beast. Far below, the valleys remained hidden beneath an ocean of cloud. Only the highest peaks rose above it, dark islands beneath the pale morning sky. The cold hurt my teeth when I breathed. I welcomed it. The clean scent of snow, stone, and thin mountain air brought back memories of home, not Roe. I had never truly considered Roe my home. How could I? It was a dead kingdom I knew only through stories told by those who had watched it burn. Home was Nisei's mountain. Home was the thunder of wings inside vast caverns. It was silver scales shining beneath blue fire, young dragons fighting over sleeping places, and voices so deep they vibrated through my bones. I had spent my childhood surrounded by creatures who could swallow me whole and thought nothing unusual of it. The human world had always felt smaller afterward, more crowded, more fragile. I leaned against the stone beside the cave entrance and watched snow drift from the ledge. I had not known what a warlock was when my power first appeared. I was perhaps 7 years old, though dragons were never particularly skilled at measuring human age. They counted years by winters, flights, hunts, and moltings. For some time I believed I was either 6 or 11, depending upon which dragon one asked. That day, several young dragons had cornered me near one of the lower nesting chambers. They were older than I was, though still young enough to be foolish. One held my cloak beneath a claw. Another had taken a wooden practice sword Nisei had commissioned for me and was passing it back and forth beyond my reach. "Jump for it, Moxtuanotrakes, little prince." I jumped. They lifted it higher. I demanded that they return it. They laughed. I threatened to have them banished from my kingdom. They laughed harder. I remember the heat rising through my chest. My hands began to shake, and every sound inside the cavern seemed to vanish beneath the pounding of my heart. Then something tore loose inside me. Lightning burst from my fingers. It struck the nearest dragon across the snout with a crack that echoed through half the mountain. The discharge was not powerful enough to cause real harm, but it sent him stumbling backward into the others. 3 young dragons collapsed into a tangled heap of wings, tails, and furious shouting. I remained standing for approximately 2 breaths. Then the world turned sideways. When I woke, Nisei was looking down at me with concern, while the dragon I had struck insisted loudly that I had attempted to murder him. I did not know where the lightning had come from. I did not know how I had summoned it. For several days, I feared that a storm had somehow become trapped inside my body. Miardir explained otherwise. He was one of the dragon priests who tended the old shrines within Nisei's mountain. He was ancient, even by draconic standards, with darkened silver scales, clouded eyes, and 1 broken horn. He spoke slowly, partly from wisdom, and partly because he knew everyone would wait for him to finish. Miardir told me that I was a warlock, not a wizard. Wizards shaped magic through study, ritual, carefully chosen words, and physical components that helped focus their will. Powders, stones, carved symbols, preserved roots. Every spell required preparation. A warlock carried the source within. I did not need a pouch of ash to summon flame or a silver wire to call lightning. My will was the focus. My body supplied the energy, and the magic answered readily. That did not mean freely. Warlock spells were usually less intricate than those woven by trained wizards. We could cast them quickly, often with little more than a thought or gesture, but every spell drew directly from the strength of the caster. A small flame might leave me no more tired than climbing a short hill. A bolt of lightning could make my hands tremble. Greater spells could drain the warmth from my body, weaken my heart, or leave me unconscious before the danger had passed. Miardir told me that power taken from within always demanded repayment. "The spell does not know whether you can afford its price," he once said. It only knows that you agreed to pay. He taught me control. At first, that meant hours spent attempting to light candles without setting the table on fire. Later came lightning, shields, illusions, and the shaping of raw force. Every failure earned a lecture. Every success earned a more difficult task. Miardir also taught me common. It was the language I would have learned naturally had I been raised among humans. The dragons spoke it when dealing with outsiders, but among themselves they preferred their own tongue, a language built for jaws, throats, and lungs far larger than mine. Common felt clumsy at first. Too many soft sounds, too few words for wind. The dragons had dozens of ways to describe air moving across a mountain. Common reduced most of them to breeze, gust, or storm. Miardir insisted I learn it anyway. You cannot spend your entire life inside this mountain, he told me. At the time, I had found that difficult to believe. I had possessed warmth, food, lessons, and a mother large enough to frighten armies. What could the human world possibly offer that I did not already have? The answer, as I later discovered, was trouble. A sharp gust struck the mountainside, whipping the edge of my cloak around my legs. I returned to the cave. The fire had grown strong enough to warm the center of the chamber. Ahret remained curled beside it, though her head had moved closer to the flames while I was outside. I retrieved a ration from our supplies, a compressed block of dried meat, grain, and something the merchant had claimed was fruit. It had the hardness of old wood and approximately the same flavor. I broke off a piece and chewed slowly. Ahret's nostrils flared. You refuse to help with the fire? She lifted her head. That means you do not get breakfast. Her eyes moved from me to the ration. I sighed and offered her the remaining half. She leaned forward and sniffed it. Then she snorted. The blast of air nearly knocked the ration from my hand and sent ash scattering across the floor. Spoiled, I said. Ahret lowered her head again, looking deeply satisfied with herself. You ate half a frozen mountain goat 3 days ago. Her tail curled more tightly around her body. That animal had been dead long enough to develop its own religion. No reaction. But this is beneath you. One eye opened. Yes, spoiled. She closed it again. I finished the ration myself and looked toward the cave entrance. The sunlight had strengthened, but the clouds still clung to the peaks. Snow continued to fall beyond the ledge, lighter now, though the winds remained dangerous. We would have to wait. Flying through a mountain storm was possible. Ahret was strong enough, and silver dragons were born for cold skies. Possible did not mean wise. I settled beside the fire and opened my spellbook across my knees. Ahret shifted closer, pressing one warm foreleg against my back. Hopefully the blizzard would subside before midday. Then we could leave the mountain behind. At the time, I believed the storm was the only thing delaying us. I had yet to learn what waited below.